The fluorescent lights of the courtroom hummed, casting a sterile, unrelenting glow on the polished wood. Judge Judy's bench loomed large, a testament to her authority. The air was thick with the scent of old paper, floor cleaner, and a nervous energy that radiated from the two women standing before her. They were sisters, though at first glance they might have been strangers. The one on the right, Miss Williams, shifted her weight, her gaze fixed somewhere between her sister's face and the polished toes of her own shoes. Her sister, the plaintiff, stood a little straighter, her hands clasped tightly in front of her, the small motion a clear indication of her unease. The audience, a restless sea of onlookers, murmured softly, a background noise that added to the tension. Bird, the bailiff, stood impassively, a silent sentinel of order amidst the chaos of human drama. Judge Judy, her gaze like a laser, fixed on the plaintiff. Her voice, a sharp staccato rhythm, cut through the quiet. "Ms. Williams is your sister?" "Yes," the plaintiff replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "Older sister or younger sister?" Judy's question was quick, a preamble to the rapid-fire interrogation she was known for. "Older, Pine," the plaintiff answered, her shoulders dropping slightly as if in relief that the question wasn't more complex. "How old are you?" Judy asked, her eyes moving to the plaintiff. 21. "And you?" Judy's gaze now bore into Ms. Williams, the older sister. 23, she responded, her voice a little stronger, but still laced with apprehension. The age gap was small, just 2 years. It was the kind of gap that meant they had likely shared a room growing up, worn each other's clothes, and experienced the world together. A 2-year age gap could be a bridge or a chasm, and in this courtroom it was beginning to feel like the latter. "You claim a loan to your sister." Judy stated it as fact, not a question. "Yes," the plaintiff confirmed, her voice gaining a little more strength. "A loan that you gave her 400 in March of this year." "Yes, $400. The sum was significant enough to cause a rift, but not so large that it couldn't be absorbed by a family. Yet here they were in this very public forum, airing their private dispute. The simple act of lending money to a sibling was a common occurrence, built on the assumption of trust and love. When a family member asks for help, especially for something as fundamental as rent or bills, it's almost impossible to say no. The obligation is deeply ingrained. The love, the history, the shared experiences, all of it weighs in the balance. When a sibling asks, "You help," it's an unspoken rule. The very act of asking for the money, of admitting a need, is a vulnerable moment. It's an act of trust, a hope that the bond of family will be stronger than the need for money. And for the one being asked, the weight of that trust is heavy. To refuse would be to betray a bond, and so the money is given, often with no expectation of a formal repayment plan, just the understanding that it will be paid back when possible. "Needed something for rent or her bills or whatever," Judy continued, her tone dismissive as if the reason for the loan was irrelevant. "It's really not urgently important because Ms. Williams acknowledges that you made a loan to her in the amount of 400 in March, correct?" The question, while directed at Ms. Williams, was a rhetorical flourish, a way for Judy to establish the core facts quickly. "Right," Ms. Williams said, a hint of resignation in her voice. She had already conceded this point. The debt was not in dispute. This was a critical point in the case, something Judy knew well. The foundation of the plaintiff's claim was solid. The loan was real, the money was given, the debt existed. "So you needed money. You asked your sister. She helped you." Judy's words were a clipped summary, a narrative of a simple, human transaction. "Yes," Ms. Williams confirmed. The word hung in the air, a small admission of her dependency on her younger sister. It was a humbling moment, laid bare for all to see. The emotional weight of that simple yes was immense. It carried the burden of her financial struggles and the unspoken gratitude for her sister's help. It also hinted at the subsequent betrayal of that trust. "You didn't pay her back in March. Didn't pay her back in April." Judy's voice was a drumbeat of accusation. "Right? And didn't pay her back in May." The silence that followed was deafening, a pause filled with the unspoken accusations of broken promises and strained relationships. The plaintiff stood still, her eyes fixed on her sister, a silent plea for an explanation. Ms. Williams looked away, her face a mask of shame and frustration. The timeline was a clear indictment. 3 months had passed and the debt remained unpaid. This was the point where the straightforward loan case turned. This was the moment where the family dynamic, the unspoken resentments, and the deeper issues came to the surface. It was here that the simple act of lending money became a complex legal battle. The audience shifted in their seats, a collective intake of breath. The murmur grew louder, a wave of curiosity. Bird remained stoic, but his gaze was now fixed on the two sisters, his expression unreadable. The plaintiff's hands tightened their grip on each other. She had come here for justice, to be made whole, but now she was on the precipice of something far more complicated. And then Judy, with a flick of her wrist, shuffled a few papers on her bench, her gaze still fixed on Ms. Williams. The motion was small, but the effect was monumental. It was a physical representation of the turning point in the case. Your defense to this is that your sister vandalized your car. Judy's statement was a hammer blow, shocking in its abruptness and its revelation. The air went out of the room, leaving a vacuum of stunned silence. Yes, Ms. Williams responded, her voice now filled with a new, defiant energy. This was her moment, her chance to shift the narrative from one of a deadbeat debtor to one of a wronged victim. She vandalized your car with a rock. Judy's voice was now tinged with a cold skepticism. The idea of a sister taking a rock to her sibling's car was shocking, almost unbelievable. It spoke of a deep, festering anger that went far beyond a simple unpaid loan. She got angry with you. You'll tell me about it. Judy's words were a cold invitation, a challenge. She was giving Ms. Williams the floor, but the tone was clear. She was not convinced. She was demanding proof, evidence of this extraordinary claim. And you have a counterclaim. Your counterclaim is for the damage to your car. Judy's words were sharp, precise. She was laying out the stakes of the game. The original loan was now just a side note. The real battle was for the cost of the car damage. I'm sure you have pictures and an estimate in that the damage far exceeds the amount of the loan. The final line was a gut punch, a brutal summary of the dramatic stakes. The unspoken implication was that not only did Ms. Williams not owe her sister the $400, but her sister, the plaintiff, owed her a far greater amount for the alleged damage. The simple case of an unpaid loan had morphed into a messy family feud, a story of alleged vandalism and bitter revenge. The courtroom, once a place of simple facts and figures, was now a stage for a high-stakes family drama. The air in the courtroom was charged with disbelief. The previous murmurs had died down, replaced by a collective hush as Judy's sharp words hung in the air. Your defense to this is that your sister vandalized your car. The plaintiff, the younger sister, stared at Ms. Williams, her face a mixture of shock and betrayal. Ms. Williams, the older sister, seemed to draw strength from the accusation, a defiant glint in her eyes. This was the moment she had been waiting for, the moment to tell her side of the story. Judge Judy leaned forward, her voice a low, dangerous rumble. Okay, that you are owed $400. She was speaking to the plaintiff, acknowledging the undisputed fact of the loan before pivoting back to the counterclaim. Her gaze, however, was fixed on Ms. Williams. She was the one who had introduced the explosive new element, and she was the one who would have to defend it. Do you remember this incident that your sister is talking about in May? Judy asked Ms. Williams, her voice a calm before the storm. Yes, Ms. Williams replied, her voice steady. And that was towards the end of May? Yes. Of this year? Ms. Williams murmured. The rapid-fire questioning was a deliberate tactic, a way to establish a clear timeline and keep the witness on her toes. Judy was not a judge who would allow for meandering narratives. She wanted the facts, and she wanted them now. You remember what date it took place? The 27th. Judy's eyes narrowed slightly, a silent approval of the specific detail. Why don't you tell me what happened? Ms. Williams took a deep breath, her gaze shifting to the audience before she began. The story spilled out, a torrent of long-held frustration and anger. Well, she came up to my boyfriend's house and she was honking. The image of the younger sister, sitting in her car, blaring the horn in front of her boyfriend's house, was a vivid one. It painted a picture of a woman on the verge of a breakdown, an act of public shaming and escalating aggression. This wasn't a casual visit, it was a confrontation. The sound of a car horn, a short, sharp blast, and then another and another, was an irritating, aggressive sound, demanding attention. It's a sound that says, I am here and I am not leaving until you deal with me. And then I went outside, Ms. Williams continued, her voice growing in confidence. And then she came at me because me and her boyfriend kissed at a party. The words dropped like a bomb. A murmur rippled through the courtroom, a low gasp of shock. The $400 loan was no longer the issue. This was about something far more personal, far more devastating. The betrayal. A sister kissing her sibling's boyfriend. It was the ultimate act of treachery, a violation of trust that went far deeper than any financial debt. The reason for the honking, the anger, the confrontation all came into sharp focus. The loan was just a pretext, a convenient way to get her sister to show up and face the truth. The rage that had been simmering for weeks had finally boiled over. The emotional weight of the moment was palpable. The quiet was replaced by the low hum of shocked whispers as the audience absorbed the new dramatic revelation. And she pushed me, Ms. Williams said, a trace of indignation in her voice as she recounted the physical altercation. Like I got out of the way, and then she picked up a rock and tried to throw it at me. The narrative now took a dark turn. The image of the younger sister, enraged, grabbing a rock from the ground, was a violent one. It was a detail that spoke of a loss of control, of an unhinged fury that went beyond words. The courtroom was silent, captivated by the story. The sister-on-sister violence was an appalling thought, a violation of one of the most fundamental bonds. The younger sister's face, a mask of disbelief and denial, was a stark contrast to the dramatic narrative Ms. Williams was weaving. And then I moved, and she hit her own car. The final line was delivered with a note of triumphant satisfaction, a grand finale to her story. It was the logical conclusion to a completely illogical event. The younger sister, in a fit of rage, had allegedly missed her target and, in doing so, had damaged her own property. It was a convenient, if unbelievable, explanation for the damage. A small, incredulous sound escaped from the younger sister. It was a little puff of air, a gasp of disbelief. The absurdity of the statement was a physical blow. The idea that she would, in her rage, throw a rock with such poor aim that she would damage her own car was ridiculous. Judge Judy, however, did not flinch. She had heard it all. Her skepticism was a shield, protecting her from the emotional drama of the case, allowing her to focus on the cold, hard logic. Her eyes, however, held a flicker of amusement at the sheer audacity of the claim. So she picked up a rock and threw it at you, Judy stated, summarizing the key points of Ms. Williams' story. And you say she caused the damage? Yeah. To her own car? Yes. The exchange was a testament to the unshakable confidence with which Ms. Williams was delivering her story. She believed it, or at least she wanted Judy to believe it. I'm listening, Judy said, the words a cold, measured invitation for the younger sister to speak. The tone was sharp, a clear signal that this was her chance to refute the unbelievable claim. That doesn't make any sense, the younger sister said, her voice trembling slightly with anger and frustration. She was no longer a meek plaintiff. She was a woman whose integrity had been attacked. I was standing by my car. So how would I have thrown the rock at my own car? The question was a direct appeal to logic. It was a simple, irrefutable truth. No one in their right mind would damage their own property, especially not for a paltry 400. It was the point of a sane person standing up to a ridiculous lie. The two sisters stood in the stark opposition, their narratives clashing like two opposing forces. One, a wild, emotional story of jealousy and rage. The other, a simple appeal to common sense. Judy looked from one sister to the other, her gaze probing, searching for the truth. She had laid the groundwork for the confrontation, allowing both sides to lay out their claims. She had listened to the emotional, convoluted story, and now she had heard the simple, logical rebuttal. The stage was set. The question now was, what happened next? Judy was not a judge who would let a matter of this magnitude slide. She would get to the bottom of the truth. The younger sister's simple, logical defense, that doesn't make any sense. I was standing by my car, so how would I have thrown the rock at my own car? Had momentarily stalled the older sister's narrative. But Judge Judy, a master of cutting through emotional noise to get to the facts, wasn't finished. She knew there was more to the story than a simple accusation. She leaned forward, her gaze unwavering, as she addressed the younger sister, the plaintiff. The silence in the courtroom was a heavy, expectant thing. "So, tell me what happened," Judy commanded, her voice a firm invitation to fill in the blanks. The younger sister, her composure now shattered by the previous accusations, began to recount her version of events. "When I got out, she came over there. We're arguing back and forth. The scene was now in full view. A suburban driveway, likely lined with manicured lawns and neat houses, had been turned into a battleground. The air, typically still and calm in a quiet neighborhood, was now filled with the raised voices of two sisters. The younger sister's car, the plaintiff's car, a testament to her independence, was now the centerpiece of a family feud. Judy's questioning was a surgical probe cutting through the generalities. She came over to... She walked right toward the car. She was standing like by the driveway, the younger sister clarified. She was trying to paint a picture of her position, a picture of her being on the defensive. The simple act of her sister walking toward her car carried a sense of purpose and menace, a clear signal that this was not a friendly exchange. The gravel of the driveway crunched underfoot, the sound a sharp counterpoint to the rising tension. The younger sister, standing by the open door of her car, perhaps with the radio still playing softly, was suddenly confronted with a betrayal that had nothing to do with money and everything to do with loyalty. "Okay, you went to her house?" Judy asked, her voice calm and even. "Her boyfriend's house," the younger sister corrected, "where she was staying." "Right." Judy's questions seemed simple, but they were carefully designed to establish motive and intent. She was building a foundation of facts, separating the emotional assumptions from the concrete reality. The older sister had not simply run into her sibling, she had sought her out. The very act of driving to her boyfriend's house was a declaration of war. It was a clear signal that she was not there to talk, but to confront. This was about more than a $400 loan. This was about a profound violation of trust. The courtroom fell silent again, the audience hanging on every word. The truth was beginning to surface, revealing a complex web of loyalty and jealousy. A family is built on a foundation of trust. The bond between sisters is particularly strong, a unique relationship forged in shared history and childhood secrets. When that bond is broken, the fallout can be more devastating than any financial loss. The younger sister had allegedly betrayed her sibling in a way that cut deeper than any unpaid debt. The loan was just a symptom of a much larger illness, a sickness of broken trust and shattered expectations. This was a classic tale of two betrayals. The older sister's financial trust was broken, but the younger sister's bond of loyalty was, allegedly, shattered. The weight of family expectations, the unspoken rules of siblinghood, had been violated in the most intimate way. "And you knew that she was there," Judy continued, her voice a low, steady hum. "What did you go there for?" The question hung in the air, a direct challenge. It was time for the younger sister to explain her actions. To confront her for what she did, the younger sister admitted, her voice filled with a mixture of anger and righteous indignation. The words were a clear, concise statement of purpose. She hadn't gone there to discuss the loan. She had gone there to confront the emotional betrayal. The financial dispute was the bait. The emotional confrontation was the true purpose. The honking, the aggressive stance. It all made sense now. "You didn't see what she did, but I assume you heard what she did," Judy said, her tone a mix of statement and question. And then the older sister delivered the final crushing blow. "My boyfriend admitted to it, so that's how I went over there to confront her." The older sister, with this single sentence, established the motive beyond any doubt. The information was not based on a rumor or a second-hand account. It was a confession from the person who had allegedly participated in the betrayal. This was a moment of stark clarity, a moment where the full, ugly truth was laid bare for the courtroom. The boyfriend, the very person who should have been a source of comfort and loyalty, had become a conduit for betrayal. Judy's sharp logic zeroed in on the core of the issue. So you went over to your kid sister's house because you thought she was fooling around with your boyfriend, who confessed to you that he was fooling around with your sister? The question was a precise, rapid-fire summary, a logical chain of events that culminated in a single gut-wrenching conclusion. Right, the older sister confirmed. The word hung in the air, a final, unassailable confirmation of the motive. This wasn't about 400. This was about a boyfriend, a party, a kiss, and a betrayal that had shattered the bond between two sisters. The financial dispute was merely a smokescreen, a legal avenue to address a deep personal wound. The case had transformed from a simple debt collection into a tangled web of family drama, and the true motive was now out in the open, the betrayal between sisters. The younger sister's simple, logical question had created a small, defiant pocket of silence. How would I have thrown the rock at my own car? It was a moment of clarity in a sea of emotional chaos, a rational plea in the face of a wildly emotional claim. The courtroom, which had been buzzing with whispers, fell quiet. Everyone was waiting for Judge Judy's next move. She had heard the full, ugly story, the betrayal between the sisters, the confession from the boyfriend. But Judy was a master of the unexpected. Her gaze, which had been fixed on the older sister, now shifted, as if a new, more profound question had just occurred to her. By the way, she said, her voice dropping to a low conversational tone, what did you say or do to your boyfriend? The question was a moral left hook. The older sister, who had just laid out a brutal tale of sibling betrayal, was now being asked about the other half of the equation. The man who had, by her own admission, confessed to the infidelity. The younger sister's eyes widened, her head tilting slightly in anticipation. The audience, too, leaned forward. It was a question that no one else in the room had dared to ask. The focus of the case had been so squarely on the sisters that the boyfriend had been relegated to a plot device. The older sister seemed caught off guard. She hesitated, stammering for a moment. Well, that's a different story. We got into it before I went over there. Judy wasn't having it. What is, she began, her tone a clear signal that there were no separate stories, only a single intertwined narrative of betrayal. The older sister, realizing she couldn't evade the question, shifted her focus back to what she considered the central crime. But at the end of the day, that's my sister. So I would expect more from her, Joe. So that's why I went to go confront her. The words hung in the air, a raw and poignant reflection of the hierarchy of loyalty. In her mind, the boyfriend's actions were a secondary offense. He was an outsider. He could be replaced. But her sister? The bond with her sister was supposed to be unbreakable. This was the moral heart of the matter, a deeply personal struggle between the expectations placed on family and the low expectations she held for a man. The courtroom buzzed with murmurs of agreement. This was a sentiment that resonated with many in the room. Bird, the bailiff, even allowed a subtle, almost imperceptible nod. It was a universal truth, a lesson many had learned the hard way. The disappointment in a romantic partner's infidelity, while painful, pales in comparison to the devastation of a betrayal by a family member. Judy's expression, a mix of severity and wisdom, softened slightly. She recognized the logic in the older sister's reasoning, even if she didn't approve of the methods. Well, that's true, she conceded, the words a momentary lull in her relentless interrogation. So you expect nothing from your boyfriend? Well, I expected, the older sister started to protest, so that you're not disappointed. Judy finished for her, her voice a sardonic blend of humor and harsh reality. I was more than disappointed with him, the older sister insisted, her voice now filled with a genuine hurt. But I was more disappointed with her because that's my sister. It was a moment of profound clarity. The older sister's anger wasn't just about a kiss. It was about the crushing weight of a shattered trust. It was about the unspoken promise that a sister's loyalty would always be absolute. It was a deeply personal, emotional truth laid bare for all to see. Judy, with a rare flash of compassion, acknowledged the validity of her feelings. I don't disagree with you. I think that that's probably logical that you would expect more from your sister than you would do from a boy. The word boy was delivered with a particular brand of Judy-esque contempt, a dismissal of the male species as inherently unreliable. She was a no-nonsense arbiter of justice, and in her court, men were often a source of trouble and a cause for disappointment. She wasn't just giving a legal opinion. She was dispensing life advice. She was saying that a man, particularly a young one, would be expected to do something foolish. A sister, however, should have known better. Because how old are you? She asked, her gaze on the older sister. 24. No morals, Judy declared, a dry, almost humorous aside to the courtroom. The audience laughed, a brief release of tension. They think with a different organ than most people. The words were a classic Judaism, a blunt, cynical, and ultimately logical summary of what she had witnessed in her years on the bench. But I can understand it, she continued, her tone now returning to its serious investigative rhythm. So you went over there to your sister's house where she was staying, and you drove there. What did you do? The question was a return to the scene of the crime, pulling the older sister back from the philosophical discussion of loyalty to the gritty, physical details of the confrontation. The older sister, now fully immersed in the narrative, described the scene as it unfolded. I started honking the horn, and then she came out, and the image was vivid. A car idling in a driveway, a finger pressed down on the horn, the angry, demanding sound echoing through the neighborhood. It was the sound of a person at their wits' end, a person demanding an explanation and a confrontation. And then, the younger sister, the plaintiff, had emerged from the house, stepping into the emotional firestorm. The two were now face to face, no longer separated by distance or a third party. The scene was set, the tension was at its peak, and the two sisters were finally about to confront each other in front of the world. The room was silent, waiting for the rest of the story. The younger sister had just emerged from the house, stepping into the emotional firestorm brewing in the driveway. The older sister stood by her car, a vehicle now at the center of a much larger conflict. Judge Judy's gaze, which had softened for a moment in a rare flash of compassion, was now as sharp as attack. She had just laid bare the sisters' moral compasses. The older one's profound disappointment in her sibling, a disappointment far greater than any betrayal by a man. The stage was set, and Judy, ever the maestro of courtroom drama, was ready to conduct the final act of this family tragedy. So she came out of the house, and you are where? Judy's voice was a low hum, a persistent probe for the truth. By my car, the younger sister replied, her voice now a mix of defiance and exhaustion. I walked around it, so I'm by the back door. The image was clear. The older sister was parked, honking. The younger sister came out not to her sister, but to the front of her own car. She then walked around to the back of it, creating a physical barrier between them, a desperate attempt to put some distance between her and the source of her sister's rage. This small movement was a silent, desperate prayer for protection, a futile attempt to avoid the coming storm. And then what happened? Judy's question was a trigger, a command for the emotional dam to break. We're going back and forth, yelling, calling each other names, the younger sister said, the words a blunt summary of a raw, brutal moment. The air was filled with shouted insults, a cascade of hurtful words meant to sting and wound. The quiet suburban street was now a theater of war, the neighbors' curtains probably twitching with curiosity. The younger sister's rage, ignited by her sister's presence and the public shaming of the horn honking, now fully erupted. She wasn't just defending herself, she was lashing out. The older sister, fueled by a betrayal that felt more intimate and painful than a financial debt, returned every volley. And then the younger sister recounted the line that broke the camel's back. She got mad because I told her that I would sleep with her boyfriend because of what she did. A collective gasp rippled through the courtroom audience. The words were a shock, a sudden, vicious escalation. It was a lie, a cruel and calculated strike aimed at the older sister's most vulnerable point. It was a verbal rock, thrown with the intent to inflict maximum emotional pain, a vengeful response to a betrayal she had just been accused of. It wasn't just a threat, It was a perversion of the act that had started the whole conflict. It was an affirmation of the older sister's worst fears, even if it wasn't true. So that's when she threw the rock, the younger sister continued, the words coming out in a rush, a grim account of cause and effect. And I ducked. So well, not ducked, but went out the way, and then it hit the car. The narrative was finally complete. A full, horrifying picture of a family feud gone wrong. The older sister, already seething with a raw, primal rage, was hit with the ultimate emotional insult. Her vision blurred with tears and anger, her judgment clouded by a profound sense of betrayal. She reached down, found a rock, and threw it. The younger sister, seeing the rock leave her sister's hand, instinctively stepped out of the way. She didn't duck, she simply moved. And in that split-second decision, the rock, meant for her, found its target, the car, the very object that had been the subject of this entire legal dispute. The silence that followed was heavy, a thick, suffocating blanket. The audience was stunned, the full absurdity of the situation laid bare. A family feud over an unpaid loan had spiraled into a physical confrontation over a betrayal, culminating in the older sister causing damage to her own property. Judge Judy's voice, when she finally spoke, was a cold, sharp blade. Well, you really didn't mean that when you said that to her. Her words were directed at the younger sister, a clear signal that she saw the statement for what it was, a vicious lie meant to inflict pain. No, I wouldn't, the younger sister admitted, her voice now small and full of shame. The adrenaline had worn off, and the reality of what she had said and done was settling in. Because that would be really stupid, Judy stated flatly, her eyes boring into the younger sister. Yeah. Then you would be the fool, right? Judy challenged. Right. Judy's logic was relentless. She was forcing the younger sister to admit her own part in the foolishness, to own the fact that her words, just as much as her sister's actions, had led to this outcome. The different organ remark from a few moments ago was now a shared, ironic acknowledgement between them. Both women, in their own way, had acted foolishly and allowed a man to come between them. The tension, which had been so palpable, now eased slightly. The emotional core of the case had been exposed and dissected. All that was left was the cold, hard logic of the law. Have you spoken to each other since? Judy asked. The question was a simple one, but the answer carried the full weight of their fractured relationship. No, the single word was a definitive end to their bond. The 400 was nothing compared to the emotional debt that now lay between them. Okay, Judy said, a final authoritative end to the emotional interrogation. Can I see photographs of the car, please? The younger sister handed a series of photos to Bird the bailiff. Bird, in his usual stoic manner, looked at them and passed them to Judy. The courtroom was silent. This was the moment of truth, the moment the physical evidence would either support or destroy the narrative. The photos, a stark and brutal contrast to the live-action drama that had just been described, showed the chipped paint, the jagged gouge, the small but unmistakable dent. What kind of rock caused this damage? Judy asked. Like a little boulder, the younger sister replied, her voice now a whisper. It was like a large rock, like there's like a little garden and there's rocks around it. And that's the one she grabbed. The image was vivid. A garden bed meant for peaceful, beautiful things had become the source of a weapon. The rock, once just a decorative part of a suburban landscape, was now a symbol of a family torn apart. Do you have an estimate for fixing it? Yeah, the younger sister handed over the final piece of evidence, a document that converted emotional turmoil into a tangible, numerical value. The crumpled estimate was the final word in this sad, absurd story. Judy looked at the paper, her eyes scanning the numbers. The silence was the longest and most tense of the entire proceeding. She looked up at the two sisters who stood before her, broken and silent. Her expression was unreadable. She was no longer a judge. She was an accountant, a mathematician of human folly. $816, she said, her voice clear and without emotion. Minus 400. She looked from one sister to the other. That's 416 though. The calculation was swift, brutal, and utterly final. The older sister's loan was gone, a casualty of her own actions. She had come to court to demand payment for a loan, only to have the entire amount of that loan erased, and more as a result of her own actions. The younger sister, the plaintiff, had lost her loan, but she had gained the money to fix her car. So you lost the loan, and she's getting her car fixed, Judy concluded, a simple, dispassionate summary of the outcome. Judgment on the counterclaim in the amount of $416. The words were a final authoritative statement. There was no room for argument, no room for emotion. We're finished. Thank you. The finality in Judy's voice was absolute. The sisters stood for a moment, the judgment hanging in the air between them. They did not look at each other. They did not speak. The legal battle was over, but the emotional wound remained. The $400 loan was a footnote. The rock, the insults, the fractured bond, that was the real, lasting damage. They turned and walked out of the courtroom, two strangers who shared a past, and now a deep and uncrossable divide. The audience watched them go, two broken women who had learned a hard lesson in the most public way possible.